All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jillian Graver, Executive Director of Protect PT, and thank you so much for joining us on our virtual lunch hour. We actually have a really special guest today, Maya Van Rossum. She's a founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations, a grassroots nonprofit organization inspiring a nationwide movement to secure constitutional recognition of protection of environmental rights in every state and ultimately at the federal level. So Maya is also the Delaware Riverkeeper, and so she's been leading the watershed-based advocacy organization for 25 years, and we are really pleased to have her on today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maya.
Thanks for having me.
So this is our virtual lunch hour, and we've got some great stuff planned for you guys today. There will be a chat function, and Mary's actually on the back end in our comments on YouTube. So if you have questions or comments for Maya, please put them in the chat for us, and we can see those and respond to those live. So that'll be really fun. And then also at the end of the presentation, this was something that we had on Eventbrite for signups. So please make sure you're signed up, because you'll be entered into a raffle to not only get one of Maya's books, but also they have been so generous and have a t-shirt available for us as well. So we're really excited to be able to offer some incentives today for joining in and commenting. So we want to really encourage people to do that, because that's the whole point of having this forum in the first place, right? So we're going to start off by really just talking about, what did the founders of the Green Amendment hope to accomplish when they started this, and we're going to let Maya talk about that a little bit. So go ahead, take it away, Maya.
Oh, great. So I really thank you for this wonderful opportunity. This lunchtime series has been very fascinating and so enjoyable, and I'm happy to be a participant now, or as a presenter now, as opposed to a participant on the other end. Green Amendments for the Generations and this National Green Amendment movement really is an outgrowth of my work as the Delaware Riverkeeper, where I hope that everybody is aware that while Pennsylvania has had Article 1, Section 27, what I call Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, since 1971, that amendment was only given legal life when the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and myself and my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper successfully argued before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that the very pro-fracking Act 13, amongst other things, violated the Constitutional Environmental Rights Amendment. And in December of 2013, we got this powerful opinion, which responded to legal arguments by our municipal partners in the case, but also responded to our Article 1, Section 27 arguments in a very powerful way, and breathed legal life into Pennsylvania's Green Amendment. In the wake of that victory, as we were going forth, right, trying to take full advantage through advocacy and litigation of the power of Pennsylvania's now living Green Amendment, I was reflecting more and more about what we truly had accomplished, not just for litigation, but for advocacy and for advocates in the environmental movement. And I really looked at every constitution across the nation and found that there was only one other constitution that had a Green Amendment of this kind. And that's what inspired me to write the book, The Green Amendment. And if you were to purchase that book, every penny goes to the Green Amendment movement. And then also to found Green Amendments for the Generations and really try to inspire communities across the nation to add this same kind of powerful constitutional protection and recognition to the Bill of Rights section of every constitution across the nation. And so that's the goal. Let's get one in every state constitution. And then when we hit critical mass, we will be in a position to start to advocate for one in the federal constitution as well. But we start with the states and then we work up to the feds.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great plan. And we as...
So have you put yourself on mute? Oh. I think so.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I unmuted myself, but it didn't unmute me. Thank you. So yeah, so we at Protect PT have actually really used the Green Amendment in several of our challenges in court and actually before the local boards. We think it's a really essential thing that people really they need to know about. They need to know how to use it. And so I think the work that you guys are doing is really important because, the whole point of this legislation in the first place was to, back when Franklin Curry, proposed the legislation, um, it was really to protect Pennsylvanians, and we've seen this whole fracking boom happen over the last 17 years, and it doesn't seem like anybody is aware of or following the Green Amendment. So, what would you say to somebody if they didn't know that the Green Amendment existed, and how would you introduce that to them?
Well, so first off, right, it's just just letting them know, because there are so many people in Pennsylvania and around the nation who first off think that they have truly a right to clean water and clean air and a healthy environment, but in most places they don't actually have that right because it is not protected constitutionally. And so letting people know, though, that while they believe that they have a right to these things, they in fact do. And they need to start to embrace Article 1, Section 27 in their advocacy day in and day out. It's a very short provision. It's 3 powerful sentences. But what those 3 powerful sentences do is it means that our rights to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment are given the same powerful legal protection as is given to all those other fundamental rights that we hold dear, that we have learned about since we were in elementary school, right? The rights to free speech and freedom of religion, private property rights, gun rights. I mean, think how powerfully they are protected. That same powerful protection now should come to bear for the environment. The problem is, and why we need people embracing, understanding, and using the Green Amendment because it's the right thing to do. But one of the other things is that as you use the amendment in your advocacy, you are also educating government officials across Pennsylvania. Right now, the Green Amendment applies to every level of government, from the governor to the legislators to the local town council. Unfortunately, because between 1971 and 2013, the courts gave all of those government officials permission to ignore the Green Amendment, declaring it really to just be a statement of policy. They did ignore it. They didn't read it. They didn't become aware of it. They certainly didn't utilize it. And so we are in this position of not only having to re-educate the people, but re-educate all of our government officials to make them understand that they have this constitutional obligation. So that's sort of part one, and making them, through our advocacy, embrace the importance of honoring their constitutional obligation to protect environmental rights. And then also realizing, when they fall down on the job to do that, that there is this litigation option. Now, I understand litigation, is not an opportunity for every organization. Protect PT has done a great job using the Green Amendment. The Delaware Riverkeeper Network, Pennsylvania Environmental Defense Fund, have these resources and have been taking advantage of them. Many organizations don't. And so if you feel that you've got a strong Green Amendment case, you need to reach out to organizations like ours to see if, we might be able to help you out. Though recognizing the organizations I mentioned and most environmental organizations that litigate, we're not attorneys for hire, whether you pay or don't pay. My organization brings litigation on behalf of myself and my organization. So if you think you've got an environmental rights amendment case, you need to come to us before you get to the litigation stage, when we're still in advocacy. And then we can advocate together and lay the groundwork necessary for successful litigation. It's also important to understand, what a Green Amendment does and doesn't get you. A Green Amendment doesn't get you litigation against the local developer, the local farmer, the local discharger. What it does is get you litigation against government officials to hold them accountable for honoring the constitutional environmental rights amendment when they legislate, when they regulate, when they issue permits to those dischargers that would allow them to discharge pollution in a way that potentially violates the constitutional environmental right. And so understanding what the push points are important, and who your target is in terms of preparing for litigation, that's important. It's also important to understand that the Green Amendment doesn't just, when properly implemented, get you that final right decision at the end of saying no to something that might violate the rights to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. But it also gets you the right to transparent, good, thoughtful, science-based decision making. One of the things that we and others have demonstrated through our litigation is if you can show that your government officials have, for example, issued a permit for the spreading of sewage sludge in a way that would be harmful to a stream, and they haven't looked at the facts, the science, the impacts of, around that relevant to that decision making, then they can actually be held to be in violation of their constitutional duty to protect the natural resources of the state, because part of their trust obligation, as laid out in Article 1, Section 27, is to make sure that they are engaging in thoughtful decision making. That's part of one of the fiduciary duties of a trustee. So it is about the right outcome, but it's also about the right process. In Article 1, Section 27 is very powerful in an environmental justice context as well, from that thoughtful decision-making process, making sure that government officials are not sacrificing one community in order to protect another, because we all have the same constitutional right, and you cannot target communities of color in order to help the rich white folks and be fulfilling your constitutional obligation. So those are a little bit of the tidbits. I know we have limited time, but I really want to put in people's brains that there are a lot of benefits that come from a Green Amendment. And you can, if you go to forthegenerations.org, we have webinars and fact sheets and resources and talk clips that can help bring you up to speed on these aspects of a Green Amendment that are really vital to your advocacy and ultimately to successful litigation.
Yeah, and so a couple things that you said that I think are really important. One, the environmental justice aspect, that's something that I think a lot of folks need to understand. And I think also the point about, this doesn't mean that you're just going to automatically get a win, from your government officials, because, in the case of our substantive validity challenge, which Delaware Riverkeeper Network, they did an amicus brief for us for our challenge to the ordinance here in Penn Township. And we ended up losing that challenge, but when we were engaging in that litigation, one of the things that we highlighted was the Green Amendment and the fact that our government officials did not fulfill their trust duties. And so I think a lot of people don't understand kind of what that means, but when our elected officials take their oath of office, they have to, swear to abide by the Pennsylvania Constitution. And you're right, this constitutional right should be given the same weight as all the other constitutional rights. And I know that there are advocates out there, like, gun advocates, for instance, that, advocate for the rights of them to bear arms. And, a lot of times when I talk to folks, they know about that right. They know about our right to free speech, but they do not know about our right to clean air and pure water. And it seems like, to me, when I look at it, I see, like, on one hand, something that is not essential to your health as a human, and something that is essential to your health as a human. If you compare, the right to bear arms versus the right to have clean air and pure water. So if we're looking at these rights, while they're not being thought as equally. I would argue that the right to clean air and pure water is an essential human right that we all need to have. And so I think that that's why it's so important that people understand this, because when you do go to litigate, you know, in the instance of when we went in front of a court here in Westmoreland County, the judge said to us, well, I didn't realize that there was a constitutional right to clean air and pure water. And that just flabbergasted me. The fact that he didn't know about that. Do you have, if you could talk to the judge right now, what would you say, Maya?
It's time to get educated. And I think that you and your litigation, and hopefully us with the amicus brief offering, took a powerful step to educate that judge. So next time we don't get that kind of, I think it's inexcusable. I mean, truthfully, right? That is the job of a judge, not just to understand the law, but truthfully to read the briefs. Yeah. And to read them fully and fairly and embrace them. And while we certainly don't think that was the right outcome, in that really important case that you brought, and there are a number of outcomes that we don't think have achieved the right conclusion. Every single case has helped move the ball forward. If all we did in that case, well, it wouldn't be good enough, but if we accomplished educating that judge so that the next time you or I or somebody else litigates, he is fully prepared to really embrace the Environmental Rights Amendment in his decision making, that's a win next time around, right? And so I think every case, again, collectively is moving the ball. But we also have had a lot of successes, right? Now, we have not stopped fracking yet. And I think if we had had a living, vibrant green amendment before fracking came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we actually could have used it to keep fracking out because we had the science and the facts, and we could have kept it out. The problem is that by the time we got a living green amendment, fracking was already here, right? And so just like with other industrial operations that are wreaking havoc on our environment, on our water, airs, climate, communities, we are in the position of having to claw back ground. And the way you do that legally is case by case by case. And every case that sets precedent raises the bar for all the other future government decision-making that's going to take place, including new permits, permit renewals, regulations, legislation, policy, investments, and so on. But it does require us to go case by case by case. And so it's slow and it's painful, but we are making progress on the fracking front. We have also made progress. There have been cases brought in the context of, again, sewage sludge spreading, where the DEP inappropriately issued a permit to spread sewage sludge on a farm field with residents around an exceptional value stream. And because of Article 1, Section 27, that permit got pulled back. It has been used in the context of factory farms. It has been used in the context of the legislators trying to misappropriate environmental protection funds and use them for the general operating budget. Most recently, right, there have been many instances where the Attorney General, Josh Shapiro, has used the Green Amendment as sort of a foundation piece for enforcement actions that he has taken. And I'm sure many in the audience are aware that we know that it recently became instrumental in advancing a grand jury investigation, which resulted in recommendations for increased protections when it comes to fracking. Now, those increased protections, I don't think go far enough, but they certainly move the ball and move the bar. And the Attorney General and the grand jury felt empowered to do this really damning investigation, demonstrating how our government has so seriously failed us, not just accidentally, but intentionally, but also to through their recommendations, seriously and significantly raise the bar in important ways. It has been, Montana's Green Amendment has been used to void out gold mining permits, and also protect drinking water supplies. Oh, and in Pennsylvania too, two really powerful cases happening right now, right? When you talk about PFAS, PFOA, PFNA, right?
Yeah.
Contamination, per and polyfluoroalkyl contamination of drinking water supplies. Delaware Riverkeeper Network initially submitted a petition and is now using litigation in significant part based on Article 1, Section 27 to push the Commonwealth to put in place drinking water standards.
Yeah.
When it comes to PFAS, PFOA, PFAS, PFC contamination. In another situation, we have a highly contaminated site, a site super saturated with TCE, trichloroethylene, impacting a local residential community, as well as an exceptional value stream and exceptional value wetlands. It's got a spreading pollution plume. The government has known about the very serious contaminated condition at this site since at least the mid 1980s, and yet has spent more time trying to help a developer develop the site while the site remains in this toxic contaminated condition, bringing families to the site than it has spent going after the deep pocket corporations that are known responsible parties under the law. And so we have brought a legal action, not just under state law, but under Article 1, Section 27, challenging the government's failure to act. And in a preliminary decision out of the courts, the court made very clear that the failure of government to act can be considered a violation of Article 1, Section 27, constitutional obligations. So these are just a few examples of where you can see the multiple ways that the Green Amendment is helping in a very real, meaningful way to protect the environment and to protect communities in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And in so doing, not just protecting us, but helping us to inspire other states across the nation to embrace this approach, right? Because there are a lot of, cross-boundary issues with air and with water, but amongst them is the climate crisis. We need green amendments everywhere to be stopping the devastations of the fossil fuel industry and their contribution to the climate crisis. We have a really important obligation here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to do our part. And Article 1, Section 27 helps us there. But we also need every other state across the nation to do their part. And a similar green amendment in other states could help do that. So, there's so many benefits locally, regionally, statewide, nationally, internationally that come from this Green Amendment movement as we progress, that it's so empowering and inspiring, not the least of which is how it makes advocates feel about themselves. I mean, how many times, all of you advocates out there, right? How many times have you gone into a public meeting and watched as the decision makers on the dais roll their eyes at you when you talk about the importance of the environment and the water and the air, or been ridiculed by people in the audience, right? Or even by government officials, right? Who have mischaracterized us and our intentions. Well, they don't speak that way about people who are fighting for the right to free speech, because it's a constitutional, inalienable Bill of Rights protection. Well, that same power now comes to play for a Green Amendment. So they can no longer just say, well, you're just a tree hugger or a fish lover. No. They now must recognize that we are true patriots that are rising up to defend a constitutional right. Right. So it makes a difference in how we think about ourselves in the face of that ridicule from the room. And it makes a difference in how everybody else in that room, including the government officials, must perceive us. So even in that level, I just think it's so, inspiring and empowering.
It is, and I can tell you're passionate about it, and I've been there. I have been in the room where we're called the tree huggers, and I always say I like trees, but ultimately I like my health and I like the health of my children, and that's what we're fighting for. It's not that we're fighting to save all the trees, it's that we're also fighting to save the humans. And I think it's really an important connection to connect that with global climate change, because if we had these types of constitutional rights globally, I think we'd be in a much better position to really promote the health of the earth, because quite frankly, the earth will be here even when we're all gone. We're the ones that need protecting from the industries that try to pollute us and hurt us. We do have a question. We've got a question from Lois. She says, assuming that there's a process to report violations of the Environmental Rights Amendment locally, is there a process that allows a third party at that point to monitor air and water quality? And that's a good question.
It is a good question. So the thing is, in terms of reporting violations of the Constitution, I mean, you have to think about it with other environmental rights. Really, the reporting, the holding accountable is largely and significantly all of us, right? Because one of the things that the Bill of Rights is, it is our statement to government to say, look, through this Constitution, we have given you permission to govern over us in all these myriad of ways. But these elements in the Bill of Rights section, these inalienable rights, we are holding unto ourselves. And we are telling you that as you govern over us, you may not govern in a way that infringes on, that takes these rights. And so it is in large part, really, it is on the people to hold government accountable through the advocacy, through the litigation, through the ballot box. There is, if you really think that there has been an abuse of power, right, where government officials are misappropriating and abusing their power, there are other mechanisms to report them, but it's not a reporting of the violation of the Constitution, right? It is more a misappropriation of the power. So if you're thinking about the Attorney General or reporting within the chain of command in the agency. But I mean, think about the right to free speech. If you feel like there are government officials within an agency that are tromping on your right to free speech, you're going to go up the echelons within that agency, all the way up potentially to the governor's office. Maybe you're going to go to the Attorney General's office. But in the final analysis, if nobody is there to help you, one of the powerful things about the Green Amendment is you do get immediate access to the courts, to be able to turn to the justice system, right, to protect your rights. So I hope that that's helpful, just sort of thinking about it in the same way you think about those other rights. In terms of the need to monitor, so that becomes part of the argument for informed decision making, right? So if you think about there's a new industry that's going to be put in the heart of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or some other urban or urbanized center where there is already high levels of air pollution that is inflicting health harms on the local community. Those situations, usually you are talking about Black and brown communities, right? And now there's going to be a permit to put another highly polluting industrial operation in the midst of that already highly contaminated area. There, your argument may very well be that the government cannot constitutionally support the issuance of that permit because they have no idea. They did not consider the high level of air pollution that already existed. They didn't collect the data for what was already there. They didn't do the science to understand the impacts of adding this new source of air contamination. They didn't look at the cumulative impacts of what is already there with what is to be added for the health of the local community. And so that's really how you hold government accountable for that science side of the Green Amendment, is you use it in the context of, were they able to defend their decision with by looking at the science and, the cumulative impacts and the real world ramifications of the decision that they are about to make, or that they have made. There is some very thoughtful consideration that, one of the powerful things about Pennsylvania's Green Amendment is it sets up the natural resources as a trust, right? The natural resources are the corpus of the trust. The state is the trustee that must protect that trust for the benefit of the beneficiaries, the people. Think about it like a money trust, right? If you had a money trust, you would have a lawyer responsible for managing that money in order to benefit, the young college student that needs that money to go to college, perhaps, right? One of the fiduciary obligations is that informed decision making. You wouldn't have that lawyer just say, well, gee, that looks like a great way to invest that money. I have zero information about that investment, but I'm just going to throw this money all the way around. No, if they actually did that and they lost all the money, guess what? They would be legally accountable for that lost money. Same thing with the environment, except the throwing it around is what you're doing with the permits and the legislation and the regulation. You still have to have that very informed decision making by the trustee, which in this case is all of the government officials. And one of the things that a trustee has to do is have an accounting of the money. How much is there? Where is it? How much where? Right? And be able to report to the trustee at all times, this is the status of your trust. And so there's some really good, thoughtful decision making that in the natural resource context, what could that mean? That could mean that there must be a real world accounting of the status of the natural resources of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that is always available to the people of Pennsylvania. So that's an accounting, not just of what exists, but what is the quality, what is the health of what exists in terms of the natural resources. So that becomes another way to think about that responsibility to monitor and report to the people.
Well, and I think in the case of the water, I think about this all the time. It's, if you've ever seen the movie The Lorax, which illustrates it, the book illustrates it too, and you know that I know that that's something that's close to your heart and close to mine as well, because our kids went to speak at the Capitol together, wearing Lorax costumes, and spoke to the governor. But if you think about that story, this polluter is polluting the air and water, and then there's no air and water. And actually, in the movie, they can it. I don't know if it's Disney or whoever made it, but they can the air, and then they're selling it. And we see this with bottled water. They're polluting our natural water sources, and then they're making the plastic from the natural gas that they're extracting, and polluting our water sources while extracting that, and then they're selling us our own clean water that they have to filter and process to get it clean in order to sell it to us as drinking water. To me, it seems nuts. It's just absolutely nuts. And something that you said that really, I wish I could pick apart your brain when we're going through these cases sometimes, because I was just writing down a lot of what you were saying, because in the case of Braddock, there's in Braddock, Pennsylvania, which is an environmental justice community, they're proposing a fracking well pad at the steel mill, and the steel mill hasn't been in compliance for decades with EPA standards. And so the thought of putting another pollution source to an already overly polluted area is unconstitutional, and the DEP approves it, and the local government approves it, and so where does it stop? So that just, when you were talking about that, it made me think of that case, and that's the argument that I kind of had in my head, this accumulative effect. And we saw it when we went before the Commonwealth Court back in January. Ryan Hamilton, our attorney from Fair Shake, argued, one of the things that he argued for these 2 well pads that we were fighting at the Commonwealth Court appealing, because at the county level we did not get any justice. And so now at the state level, we don't get any justice. And this is like the 11th and 12th well pad in one community that has over 20,000 people in it. We're talking about a residential community with lots of people and these additional pollution sources. And so if you look at them as grains of sand, 1 or 2 grains of sand in your swimsuit's not going to irritate you, but a whole bunch of sand in your swimsuit definitely will. And if you look at it from that perspective, this is why we're saying, enough is enough, and I think that the Attorney General's report really says a lot. And I think that this hopefully will give teeth to the claims that we've been making. We have been telling the Attorney General, we have been telling the DEP, we have been telling the Inspector General for over the last year and a half that we are not getting any relief in the normal course of the law. So we're going to court, we're not getting any relief there. So where do you get the relief if, the agencies are failing you, if your government's failing you? Really, this environmental rights amendment is being ignored, and it can't be. And that's why we need to advocate for it, because it's going to make it stronger the more people know about it and the more people know how to use it. And I think that that's really why the work that you're doing is so important, because you're breathing life into something that we should all be cherishing. We should all be protecting this. So it's interesting to think about.
It is. And, the thing is, it's very frustrating for you, for me, for everybody watching, for everybody in the world. It is very frustrating that, the passage of this Green Amendment, the existence of this Green Amendment isn't in fact an instant panacea to all the environmental ills. But there is this reality that, first off, there is this, it is true, right? There is a line, and it is not 100% clear where that line is. And the way you identify the line of clean air and pure water is through example, through case by case by case, right? And so that's why it's not this instant flip of the switch, because that clarity comes over time. I think also, we can reflect on, think about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. Think about civil rights. Think about slavery. Think about the right to vote for Black people, for women, right? Think about all sorts of fundamental freedoms that were in the Bill of Rights section, but that didn't instantly change our world in the powerful ways that it should have, or right? Because the addition of it to the Constitution is powerful and important, but what makes the real change is the people using the right in their advocacy, in their protest, in their election decisions, in their litigation. And it sadly can take a lot of time, painful protest. But if we think about all these fundamental rights, think about the right to marry for LGBTQ communities. Think how recent that right to marry is, but it wouldn't have come to pass if that litigation hadn't been grounded in a constitutional right. Same thing for the civil rights movement. You had the powerful transformational change that is certainly not yet complete, but started to change, right? Desegregating schools, right? Separate is not equal. All of those powerful advancements over time came because there was the grounding in the Constitution, which supported the advocacy and supported the litigation, but I think also created and supported and inspired the righteous indignation that the protesters and the advocates felt, and that carried them through all the difficult times. And sadly, look look to the gun rights provision. When the gun rights advocates lose the battle in an advocacy context, in a local town council meeting, at the state government or federal government level, or in the courts, right? Do they sit down and shut up? No, they don't, because they know they have this constitutional right, and they get this righteous indignation, and they rise up about the fact that they believe that their government decision makers got it wrong, right? And they become empowered to battle on. But think about, in the environmental context, pre-Green Amendment living life. Think about the environmental rights context very often at the federal, in the federal context or in other states. When people lose in courts, when they go to that town council meeting or that legislator meeting, and they've done all their powerful advocacy, and they've done all their powerful even litigation, and in the final analysis they lose, there's not much to battle on for, because that loss is verified, vindicated, supported by the laws on the books. And there's nowhere else to turn to. If you have a constitutional right, there's somewhere else to turn to. So then you don't sit down and shut up. You get that inspired righteous indignation that helps you battle on. Now, of course, there is always the next election, and elections are another powerful benefit of green amendments, because it does change the conversation around the environment. It is no longer about how do we permit, how do we manage pollution and degradation, right? We're going to accept it in how we write the laws and the regulations, and then at the end of the process, we'll think about how we're going to manage it. Right? Well, now none of us are thinking about managing anything. We're thinking about prevention. And we're going to our government officials, the people who are running for office, want to stay in office. And we say, what do you think about my right to pure water and clean air? And you have an expectation of a meaningful answer, which is more than, I'm going to fight for another good regulation for you. Right? All that regulation is about management of the pollution.
That's right.
Right. So we change the expectations of our government. We change the conversation, and it means that we also change how we hold government officials accountable, including at the ballot box.
So I think that kind of goes along with some of these questions I have. So I have two questions. It's the first one says, I've caught a lot of members of council rolling eyes. Maya Monroeville's municipal solicitor has stated that the ERA will never have a chance to be used against violators. Why do you think that is? And then she has another question here. So what you're saying, Maya, is that the process of these rights requires someone going to court on behalf to develop case laws. So do you want to respond to those?
So when the town council member says, or whoever, the solicitor says, you'll never be able to use this against the violators, I guess it depends on what he's talking about. So it is true that if you have a fracker or a developer or a pharmaceutical discharger, and they have a permit and they violate that permit, you are not going to use the Environmental Rights Amendment against that discharger, developer, or pharmaceutical company. What you're going to do is you're going to be looking to how your government officials are reacting and responding. So let's say that you do have a chronic violator of a permit, and you have a local DEP that is turning a blind eye every single time, and that the next time a permit renewal comes up, application comes in, they turn around and issue the exact same permit to the exact same industrial operator, knowing that they're going to do the exact same thing when it comes to violations. So what you're going to be thinking about in that context, and that's why you need to get in touch with sort of your legal organization early on to help think all this through. But what you're going to be doing all along through that unfortunate period of time is you're going to be laying the groundwork to prove the point that the government officials are failing, not just under the law, but under the Constitution, because they are validating, they are assisting with this perpetual violation of the law that is resulting in such serious contamination of the water or the air or the soil or the environment that it is rising to the level of a constitutional violation, right? That might be how you play that out. So no, you're not going after the discharger, but you are going after the government. You were going after the government official and the permit that they issued. So, again, if we think about the Montana case that happens last year, there was a gold mining operation outside of Yellowstone National Park. The Montana Environmental Protection Agency issued a permit to approve that gold mining operation. And there was a challenge that was in part based upon the Green Amendment. And because there was a demonstration that operation would result in environmental violations to a degree of concern, and also a failure to consider the science and the impacts, that permit, because the government officials did it wrong, that permit was voided, which meant that gold mining operation was not allowed to move forward. So that's how you get through the dominoes. That's how you get to the industrial operator, to the polluter, to the discharger, through the permissions that the government has given them to behave that way. In the context of the Attorney General, he's using the Green Amendment as an enforcement tool, at least in part, to ground his enforcement efforts. So that's really powerful. And that's really important. In terms of having to have litigation, the litigation is a piece of the puzzle, but it is not the only piece. I mean, whenever a government official at any level of government takes office, they raise their hand and they do swear to uphold the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that is a powerful promise. That is a powerful commitment. And you can, through earnest advocacy, through protest, very powerfully force government officials to begin to comply with that obligation. Not all of them, right? Not the truly bad actors in government that have the black heart and who don't care about the environment. And I'm sorry, they do exist, and I have no problem referring to them that way. But there are a lot of people, right, who really, even though they might want to go the wrong way, they are also decent people, and they might want to issue the discharge permit, but when it is pointed out to them what their constitutional obligation is as a government official, you can bring them around. So advocacy can be an important way to bring government around. And then again, ultimately, when those elections happen, using that Green Amendment to help you vet government officials, including throwing the ones out who said that they did believe in your right to pure water and then didn't do a damn thing to protect it, right? And making clear to them, you're getting tossed out because of that, and we're going to try somebody else. So again, it's not an instant panacea. It's not a fix-all instantly, but there are all these different pieces. And if we look at the power of the civil rights movement, right, those powerful advancements have happened through advocacy, through protest, through litigation, and then the next level of advocacy and protest and litigation, and the next level, and each level raising the bar, right? So we're now at this point where we really are successfully, having people out there advocating and protesting and demanding that resources not just be thrown whole cloth at the police who are literally killing Black people, but that those resources be invested thoughtfully and in significant part in other resources that are not the police, but that will help address the very real social ills that need to be addressed, that aren't more appropriately handled by the police, but are more appropriately handled by a team of social workers or whatever, right? Or great programs of all kinds that exist. But we didn't hop from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to let's redistribute our law enforcement funding, right? we had years of progress and step ups. And that's what's happening in Pennsylvania, where we had that huge step up from Article 1, Section 27 is just a policy, you can ignore it, to it's as powerful as the right to bear arms and free speech. And now we're going up.
Yeah. So I have a couple takeaways that I think are really awesome. And we're actually going to also just want to remind folks that we are going to pull the winners from the people that registered online today. That Maya has a signed copy of her book, so you can read all about what she's talking about today, and then also a t-shirt. So I want to remind people of that because we're going to do it in a couple minutes. But two takeaways that I have that I think were really important, that the Environmental Rights Amendment, to me, what you're describing is an anchor. It's an anchor. It anchors us in, in our advocacy. It's anchoring us in our litigation. It's anchoring us in our rights and in our ability to, go to those local meetings and say, and I love how you said it with righteous indignation. We can say, these are our rights and you cannot violate them. So I think that to me was like one of the big takeaways of our conversation. And then, what you were describing as, holding those permit givers accountable, we're doing right now. And I want to highlight that because we have a case before the environmental hearing board, the DEP, hearing board. And so there has been a violator who has 7 well pads planned in our community. And right next door, right over the line in another community, over this imaginary municipal boundary, they have been violating the Clean Water Act for years. They have violation after violation after violation. And we saw these stacks of paper piling up that were the violations from the DEP, and we saw the DEP not doing anything. So we actually had a really important campaign last year to let the DEP know that they're on notice, that if they don't do anything about this, and they actually did do something, they have a consent order with the operator. And part of our case with the Environmental Hearing Board is that we're highlighting the fact that the DEP has given the same operator multiple permits, yet they still haven't cleaned up the mess that they made years ago. And we're talking at this point, we're almost like 3-4 years in. I think we're hitting almost the 4-year mark. So, and they haven't even been able to, abide by that consent order. So I think that these are important things that, what's the next step there, besides taking it to the Environmental Hearing Board and trying to get that permit revoked. This is an operator that should not be allowed to operate in our community because they cannot follow the law. And I'll say it again, I say it all the time to folks. If I broke the law, I'd go to jail. But the operators are not being held to the same standards. So I think it's just crazy. So we have a few minutes. Is there we're going to do the drawing, and go, if you'll go ahead to the next screen, Patrick. This is actually the copy of the book. We have a picture here. And do you have, an ending thought you'd like to tell us before we do our drawing? Maya?
So I just want to say, first off, I'm really grateful for people participating and listening. And but I want to say that here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have a living green amendment, where we have Article 1, Section 27, we have both an opportunity and an obligation, right? We have a powerful opportunity in all the ways that we've just talked about to use that green amendment to protect our communities, to protect our environment, to protect future generations. But we also have an obligation because I am out there. I am working with communities in other states. I am pointing back to Pennsylvania and pointing to Montana and saying, this matters. This is important. And so they're looking right now at what we're doing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so it's your obligation to help me prove to all those communities in all those other states across the nation that having a green amendment is powerful and meaningful and important. And one of the things I truly, truly believe, right? If you have one green amendment, yes, and what we have in Pennsylvania, Montana, it's powerful and it's important and it's making progress. But if you could imagine, if we had this kind of protection and this kind of conversation and advocacy and litigation taking place in state after state after state, we would be dramatically raising the bar, right? Because we're dramatically raising the level of attention and conversation and expectation in all of us as a nation. And that would have a much more synergistic, powerful benefit than just one state here and one state there. So we have an opportunity, but we also have an obligation. And I hope you'll join me in embracing both of them, just as Protect PT has done such an amazing job with the amazing work that you do. With Article 1, Section 27, and just fighting for our beautiful earth and your beautiful communities and family.
And we're so happy to have you guys, do things like the amicus brief for us. I was so honored when you guys did that for us. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I think that if we all work together, we can turn those irritating grains of sand of those operators into the grains that will make the Environmental Rights Amendment across the United States. And those will be the irritants that will be irritating the industry. We'll turn the tables on them. Let's turn the tables on them. And if you'll go to the next screen, Patrick. So we have our winners here. We're going to put up here what the T-shirt looks like too. So we've got our winners, and I'm going to try to read these names. These are from our registrants for today, and we'll reach out to you because that's why we had you register for today's event. So the book winner for this is for a copy of Maya's book that's signed. I have Hazel Cahey, who is the winner of that. And I'm not seeing the shirt coming up here. There was a problem with and that's okay. There was a problem with yeah.
It's a great shirt, and it's really soft.
And then it's really soft. That's good. I like soft shirts. And then the winner for the T-shirt is, and I know I'm going to mess this up, Tabazum Shaw is the winner. And Mary's going to post that in the chat. She's going to post the winners in the chat so we have them. And, oh, great. She's going to drop the names on. And we have one of our interns, actually, we have some awesome interns and volunteers that are listening in today, and they've been listening to all of our stuff that has been going on with the lunch hour. And if you'll go ahead to the next screen, Patrick, we are so thrilled that people are watching these. So if you didn't catch it right now live, you can still catch it on YouTube. And so if you subscribe, you'll know when the next one's coming up. And so you can catch it live and ask questions live, which is, I think, a really awesome feature of the lunch hour. And then also, if you go to the next screen, Patrick, we've been collecting your surveys. Thank you so much for everyone that has filled out the survey so far. But if you haven't filled out the survey, please do, because we want to hear from you on topics that are important to you and topics that we can highlight and guest speakers that we can have on. And so we felt very strongly that with everything coming out with the Attorney General's office and all the work that we've done with the cases, with the Green Amendment, that Maya was a natural guest for us to have on here. So thank you so much, Maya. And if you'll go to the next screen, next week, we're actually going to be talking about the Mariner East, because some crazy stuff's been happening here in our hometown about developers wanting to put housing plans right on the easement, which I think is nuts. Okay, just bonkers. Okay, but we're going to be talking next week to George Alexander, who is the author of Dragon Pipe Diaries. He is full of information about the blast zone and why that is such a nutty idea to put houses right on the pipeline easement. And so we're going to be talking about the Mariner East. I really hope folks from across Pennsylvania are going to tune in next time, because we're going to have some really great call to actions that you'll be able to do right after you leave our YouTube video. So tune in next time. Thank you so much, Maya. You are
Thank
so
you.
awesome. You're so inspiring to me an organizer and as an advocate. And I just love that you could be on with us today. So thanks so much, and thanks everyone for joining us.
It was a true honor. Thank you.
All right, have a great one. Bye, everyone.
Bye.